Before the guillotine could claim her life, Marie Antoinette endured something far worse than death itself. The French revolutionaries didn't just want to execute a queen, they wanted to erase her, strip away her dignity, her identity, her very humanity, piece by deliberate piece. What they subjected her to in those final 76 days wasn't simply punishment, it was a calculated psychological assault designed to break her spirit before the blade could ever touch her neck. And yet, in those last hours, when everything had been taken from her, when she had nothing left but her own will, Marie Antoinette discovered a power they could never destroy. This is the story of how they tried to annihilate the last queen of France, and how she refused to let them win. Forget the glittering ballrooms of Versailles, the champagne fountains and silk gowns. This story begins in darkness, in the suffocating dampness of a cell nicknamed the antechamber to death, the conciergerie prison, a medieval fortress on the banks of the Seine, where thousands waited for their turn under the blade. On the 2nd of August, 1793, Marie Antoinette was torn from her surviving children in the dead of night and dragged here alone. The woman who once commanded the most opulent court in Europe became prisoner number 280. Her cell was barely larger than a closet, walls weeping with moisture, a rotting straw mattress on the floor, and a bucket in the corner. Privacy ceased to exist. 2 guards were stationed inside her cell around the clock, their eyes fixed on her every moment. They watched her eat the meager scraps of bread. They watched her attempt to wash herself behind a flimsy screen. They watched her try to sleep while rats scurried across the stone floor. This surveillance wasn't about security. It was about control, about reminding her that the woman who once decided the fate of nations now could even dress without being observed. But the physical misery, the cold and filth and hunger, none of it compared to what they had already done to her heart. Just 1 month earlier, in the middle of the night, guards had stormed into her previous cell and ripped her 8-year-old son from her arms. Witnesses described Marie Antoinette throwing herself between the men and little Louis Charles, screaming until her voice broke, her daughter clinging to her brother as they tore him away. She never saw him again, never held him again, never heard his voice. They could strip her of her crown, her jewels, her throne, but taking her child shattered something inside her that no blade ever could. Her maid would later say that the queen's heart broke only when she spoke of her children. Every other humiliation seemed to wash over her, but that grief, that loss, it consumed her in the darkness of that cell, eating away at her soul as surely as the damp ate away at the walls, and the worst was still to come. On the 14th of October, 1793, they dragged Marie Antoinette before the Revolutionary Tribunal. But this was no trial, it was theater, a scripted performance where the ending had been written before she ever entered the room. Unlike her husband, who had weeks to mount a defense before his execution, she was given less than a day. The charges read like a fever dream pulled from the most vicious propaganda pamphlets: treason, conspiracy, debauchery, stealing from the French treasury to fund Austria's wars. And then came the accusation designed to destroy not just her body, but her character, her essence as a mother. They accused her of committing incest with her own son. They had forced young Louis Charles, that little boy torn screaming from her arms, to sign a statement against her. The courtroom fell into a tense, almost expectant silence as the words hung in the air. Marie Antoinette, who had sat motionless through hours of absurd accusations, finally rose to her feet. She didn't plead. She didn't weep. She turned to face the gallery, her gaze sweeping across the faces of Parisian women who had once screamed for her blood in the streets. And in that moment, she reminded everyone in that room that before she was a queen, before she was a political symbol, she was a mother, a woman defending the most sacred bond that exists. Her dignity in that instant shook even her enemies. The verdict came swiftly: guilty, death by guillotine. If you're captivated by these dark stories from history, by the human beings who faced unimaginable cruelty and somehow found strength in their darkest hours, please subscribe to this channel. These stories deserve to be remembered, and your support helps keep them alive. Back in her cell, Marie Antoinette refused the final meal they offered. She wrote a heartbreaking letter to her sister-in-law, begging forgiveness for her son, who had been forced to testify against her. The letter was intercepted. It wouldn't be discovered for years, hidden in the pocket of a revolutionary judge. When dawn broke on the 16th of October, the final humiliation began. Guards ordered her to strip off the black mourning dress she had worn since her husband's execution. In its place, they forced her into a tattered white shift, the clothing of a penitent sinner. They cut her hair with dull scissors, hacking away the white locks that stress and grief had turned from golden blonde. Her hands were bound so tightly behind her back that the ropes cut into her skin. Then they led her to a wooden cart, the kind used for common criminals. Her husband had been given a closed carriage. She would be paraded through the streets, exposed to the hatred of tens of thousands, for over an hour. And yet, as that cart lurched through the cobblestone streets toward the Place de la Révolution, as the crowd screamed and spat and jeered, Marie Antoinette sat upright, her face composed, almost serene. They had taken everything, her crown, her children, her dignity, her very identity. But they could not take what remained inside her, that core of strength that even she might not have known existed until this moment. When the cart finally stopped and the guillotine loomed before her, she stepped down without help, climbed those wooden stairs alone, and in one final, almost surreal moment, accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot. She whispered an apology. Seconds before her death, stripped of everything that made her a queen, she remained human. She remained graceful. At 12:15 in the afternoon, the blade fell. They threw her body in an unmarked grave, but her story, the story of a woman who faced the darkest cruelty with quiet courage, refused to be buried with her. 22 years later, her remains were exhumed and laid to rest with royal honors. They tried to erase her. Instead, they immortalized her. What do you think about Marie Antoinette's final hours? Was she a victim of circumstance, or did her earlier life contribute to her fate? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Retry.